Night settles over Zwolle like a held breath. The narrow streets are empty. Shattered glass crunches under boots that do not belong to the city. Smoke from earlier shelling threads through the air in thin gray ribbons. Somewhere in the dark, a window slams. Somewhere else, a rifle is cocked. German soldiers move through the town in nervous pairs, weapons shouldered, listening for sounds that should not exist. Then, a shape appears at the edge of a canal. A lone man. His uniform bears no rank worth noticing. His helmet is scuffed. One side of his face is hidden beneath shadow, and the other reveals what is missing. One eye. Gone. Taken months earlier by shrapnel that should have ended his war. It did not. He steps forward anyway. Not with an army behind him, not with radio contact, not with orders, only a rifle. A pack heavy with grenades, and a mind that has already decided something the world has not yet accepted, that this city will not fall tonight. In a few hours, an entire German garrison will abandon Zwolle in terror, convinced they have been surrounded by an army, but no army came. Only one man did, and the army tried to get rid of him 8 times. The night folds around his silhouette as he walks into the city alone, and history follows in silence, about to change direction. By the winter of 1944, the war in Europe had changed its shape, but not its cruelty. The great mechanized thunder of Germany's early victories had slowed into a grinding collapse. France had been liberated, Paris had been freed, Belgium was in Allied hands. Yet, along the western edge of the continent, the German army still clung to channels, estuaries, and river towns with the desperation of a drowning man gripping splintered wreckage. Germany no longer fought for conquest. It fought for time. Every railroad junction, every bridge, every marsh-traced coastline became a barricade. Fuel depots were blown, roads were mined, fields were flooded deliberately. Completely intact towns were transformed overnight into strong points riddled with machine gun nests. The Wehrmacht and the Waffen-SS were no longer advancing in great sweeping operations. They were anchoring themselves to the earth, fighting in pockets where attrition was the only strategy left. Nowhere was this more brutal than along the coasts of northwest Europe. Ports had become the arteries of survival. Without them, the Allied war machines starved. Cargo ships were useless without docks. Tanks without fuel were coffins. Armies without food became refugees in their own uniforms. Every Allied advance after Normandy depended upon opening deep-water ports, and among those, one stood above all others in importance: Antwerp, captured intact. In September 1944, Antwerp was the only port large enough to supply the massive Allied armies driving eastward toward Germany. But there was a catch. The port was useless unless shipping lanes through the Scheldt estuary could be cleared. German forces still controlled the estuary, and they knew it. To keep Antwerp closed was to choke the Allied front. So Germany dug in here. The Scheldt estuary became a fortress made of water, mud, and men. Dikes were flooded. Fields were drowned. Villages were turned into island fortresses connected only by thin causeways under constant fire. German artillery sat hidden along coastal marshes, lobbing shells into narrow access routes that funneled incoming Allied troops into killing zones. This was not a battlefield built for heroics. It was slow, wet, choking work. The infantry advanced yard by blood-soaked yard. Men drowned in flooded polders under full marching kit. Others were dragged under by crumbling mud that refused to support the weight of a body. Artillery thuds were constant, distant thunder that never stopped rolling. Every farmhouse might hold a machine gun. Every hedgerow might explode. Here, no man could rely on speed. Only endurance mattered, and Canada's army had been given the assignment. After landing in Normandy in June 1944, Canadian divisions had clawed their way forward through Caen, across the Seine, into Belgium, and then north toward the Netherlands. They fought through Falaise. They chased a retreating enemy who turned suddenly and struck back hard at the exact moment everyone believed the war would end quickly. Instead, the muscles of the war tightened. Because Germany did not simply retreat, it fell back and built walls out of earth and corpses behind it. By October 1944, the Canadian Army was locked in one of the bloodiest and least glamorous battles of the entire Western Front, clearing the Scheldt estuary. Infantry assaults against entrenched German troops hiding behind flooded plains and concrete bunkers. urban fighting in towns thick with booby traps, and civilians trapped between front lines. Artillery pounding drowned fields where no tank could go. Victory here did not create headlines, but without it, the war could not continue. By November, the estuary was finally opened. The port of Antwerp began pouring supplies into Allied hands. Fuel flowed again. Food followed. Tank brigades rolled. Armies breathed. But the Germans were not finished. They leapt inland, into the Netherlands. And there, they prepared something far darker. The winter of 1944-45 became known in Dutch memory as the Honger Winter. The Hunger Winter. German forces retaliated against Dutch resistance and Allied advancement, not with just bullets, but starvation. They blocked transport routes. They confiscated food. They punished towns that supported Allied forces. Civilians withered under rationing so severe that tulip bulbs, sugar beets, and tree bark became meals. Children died in unheated apartments. Elderly families burned furniture for warmth. Hospitals operated under candlelight. And through it all, German troops dug trenches through Amsterdam's outskirts. They garrisoned towns like Arnhem and Zwolle, not as defensive lines, but as tools of punishment. By April 1945, German command structures in the Netherlands were collapsing, but the violence hadn't. Some cities were left undefended. Others were turned into traps. The town of Zwolle sat directly in the path of the advancing Canadian army. Strategically, it was valuable. Roads converged through it. Rail lines snaked outward toward Germany's heart. Whoever controlled Zwolle controlled movement across a wide stretch of northeastern Netherlands. German forces knew this, so they flooded its outskirts, built fortifications, dug weapons pits, nested machine guns into church towers and school rooftops, prepared demolition charges on roads and bridges. When the Canadians arrived at its edge, everything about the place felt wrong, too quiet, too intact. No civilians in the streets, no birds, no movement. The calm before a storm does not always announce itself with wind. Sometimes it arrives disguised as silence. Canadian commanders feared a massacre. Urban warfare in Europe had become predictable by this point. Take the first street under fire, lose a section in the second block, bend around a strong point in the third, discover machine guns in the attic. Then artillery would come, or it wouldn't. Buildings became tombstones. They did not know how many Germans waited inside Zwolle. They did not know how deeply the city had been prepared. They did know the cost of underestimating one garrison. So, before committing an entire brigade into death's waiting mouth, they did what Allied doctrine advised in cities like this. They sent a scout, just one, to slip into the dark, to count shadows, to listen for boots, to feel the pulse of the enemy in the quiet. And from the ranks of seasoned men, commanders selected an unlikely figure, a soldier the army had tried repeatedly to remove, a man considered unstable, insufferable, dangerous, undisciplined, a man with only one eye. They did not choose him because they believed in him. They chose him because they believed he would either succeed or not come back. Either outcome solved a problem. As the Canadian infantry waited along the darkened edges of Zwolle, one man checked his weapons in silence. No speech, no farewell, no audience. Just a quiet movement into city streets where death had been rehearsing alone for months. And somewhere behind him, unseen by history's lens, the war waited to find out whether it had finally met someone who did not fear it. The night swallowed him whole, and moments later, gunfire cracked inside the city. His name was Leo Major. He did not enter the war with the bearing of a future legend. No graceful origin story, no academy pedigree. He came from rough ground. Born in January 1921 in New Bedford, Massachusetts to French-Canadian parents, Leo Major was carried back across the border as a toddler and raised in rural Quebec. His childhood unfolded in tension and quiet hardship. His father, a World War I veteran, was violent. Discipline came in the form of fists more often than words. Home was not warmth. It was weather. Leo learned early that pain did not ask permission. By his teenage years, he drifted away from school and into physical labor. Logging camps, farming, work that scraped skin and built muscle, work that taught endurance without explanation. The kind of work no one praised, but that formed a body capable of surviving more than it should. When the Second World War began, Canada was far from burning cities and blitzed capitals. But Leo did not wait. In 1940, before conscription tightened its grip, he volunteered, not for glory, not for politics, to escape. He enlisted in the Canadian Army and was assigned to Le Régiment de la Chaudière, a French-Canadian infantry unit, forming part of the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division. Training officers immediately noticed something wrong and something dangerous. He did not salute perfectly. He did not follow orders automatically. He challenged people, sometimes physically. His discipline record filled quickly. So did his reputation. Major was abrasive. He ignored protocol. He was contemptuous of authority he didn't respect. He was, in the dry language of military writing, unsuitable for structured command. Transfer papers were prepared. Disciplinary actions followed. Recommendations for dismissal surfaced. The word unstable appeared more than once in internal evaluations. 8 separate efforts were made, at various points, to discharge him. 8 times the Army attempted to sever its relationship with Leo Major. 8 times it failed. Because for every breach of conduct, there was also something else on his file. Marksman-level shooting scores, a proven ability to navigate terrain alone, an instinct for ambush and movement difficult to teach, and a complete absence of fear. Officers didn't trust him, but they feared wasting him more. By 1944, as Allied forces prepared for the invasion of Normandy, Major was placed into reconnaissance duties, not because anyone believed he would become a perfect scout, but because he did not fit anywhere else. Scouts were expected to move ahead of the main line, to disappear into darkness, to observe without being seen, to endure isolation without unraveling, to kill without hesitating. Leo Major did all of those naturally. On June 6, 1944, he landed in France with Le Régiment de la Chaudière as part of the Canadian assault on Juno Beach. The Atlantic wind caught rifle barrels and helmets as landing craft doors opened. Bullets sliced water into white plumes. Smoke swelled across sand like a storm tide. Major moved through it without ceremony. Within hours, he had done something extraordinary. Alone, armed with only his rifle and knife, he captured a German armored half-track full of soldiers. And then, methodically, he marched 93 German prisoners back to Canadian lines by himself. No detachment, no escort. One man walking through freshly invaded territory with nearly 100 enemy soldiers surrendering behind him. It should have made him a hero, but Leo Major was not a man command structures knew how to celebrate. Instead of elevation, he received something else. Distrust. Because legends disrupt hierarchy. Because men like Major had a way of shaming leadership simply by existing. Then came Normandy's hedgerows, then Caen, then Falaise. Months of battle turned farmland into carcasses. Trees were shredded by shellfire. Fields became gear-filled graves. German resistance hardened and broke and hardened again. And during that long burn, Leo Major did what he always did. He walked forward. Until one afternoon, something exploded closer than it was meant to. A German phosphorus grenade detonated near his face. Shrapnel tore across bone and muscle. White-hot chemical fire scraped one side of his head. The pain was immediate and total. He collapsed. Blood poured from his face. One of his eyes had been destroyed, burned beyond repair. Doctors at the field hospital decided quickly. The war was over for him. A man with one eye could not fight. Artillery officers depended on depth perception. Infantry relied on peripheral vision. And scouts, especially, were useless without sight. Papers were stamped, recommendations written, an evacuation order prepared. Major read it, then refused it. He stood in front of medical officers with his face stitched and bandaged and said something so simple it made rooms silent. "I can still see with one eye. I only need one to shoot." They tried again. And again. Major refused. Eventually, command gave in, not from confidence, but exhaustion. Still half-blinded, still bandaged, he rejoined his unit. The men noticed. Nobody said anything, but they looked at him differently. From that day forward, his war changed. He no longer moved through smoke as another soldier. He moved like a wound that refused to close. He became quieter, colder, more focused. The loss had not broken him, it had anchored him. And then came the Scheldt. Mud, water, blood. In this campaign, Leo Major fought among dying men and soft earth and shellfire that never seemed to pause. He moved through drowned villages where bodies floated beside furniture. He crossed causeways swept by machine gun fire. He scouted enemy trenches alone, returning with hand-drawn maps and prisoner counts. He became mythic without intending to. Other soldiers whispered about him. They said he did not flinch when artillery fell, that he walked toward fire like a man walking into rain, that he had no expression when killing, that he didn't drink after missions, didn't speak much, didn't write letters. The army still did not know what to do with him. They knew only one thing: they could not get rid of him. By the time the Canadian Army breached into the Netherlands in 1945, Leo Major was no longer a nuisance. He was a living tool, a tool not to be understood, only used. So, when Canadian commanders approached the streets of Zwolle and felt the resistance waiting in stillness, they did not select their most obedient soldier. They chose the one who no longer needed orders. They gave him no plan, no route, no extraction time. They simply pointed into the night and trusted instinct over instruction. As Leo Major slipped into the dark city alone, he carried everything the war had taken from him and everything it had failed to remove. His last eye scanned rooftops. His hand touched steel. In that moment, Zwolle became not a battlefield, but a reckoning. Leo Major had become something the war did not know how to name. Not courageous in the classroom sense, not heroic in the poster sense. He was functional, efficient, emotionally sealed. Long before the Germans burned villages and flooded fields, long before shells cracked hedgerows into bones, Leo had already learned how to live in a world without kindness. Violence had entered his life early, through fists instead of bullets. Pain had announced itself before it had a uniform. So, when war offered more of the same, only grander, only louder, it did not introduce him to suffering. It simply changed its language. Men spoke of courage as something acquired. Leo had grown inside it. The loss of his eye should have ended him. For most soldiers, injury brought relief laced with guilt. A wound was a ticket out, one no one could refuse. But Leo did not register his injury as an ending. He registered it as subtraction. The war had taken something. He would take something back. This was not vengeance out loud. It was quieter, more dangerous. He did not drink away the pain. He did not tell stories. He did not cling to brotherhood with desperation. He simply went where he was needed, alone, repeatedly. And in loneliness, he became sharper. Other soldiers formed bonds. Major formed distance. And inside that distance, fear found nowhere to live. Psychologists would later call this dissociation. The military would call it usefulness. But the truth lay somewhere darker. Leo Major had crossed a line long before Zwolle. A line where death became normal and living became the difficult part. Where tomorrow mattered less than now. Where one more night survived became victory. The war did not make him hard. It found him that way. What it gave him was scale. And inside Zwolle's blacked-out streets, with brick dust in his nostrils and silence ringing in his ear, Leo did not feel heroism. He felt familiar ground. For him, this was not a mission. It was simply another night without permission to fail, and he never expected to come back. By April 1945, German forces in Western Netherlands knew something the citizens did not yet dare believe. The war was lost. Berlin would fall. Adolf Hitler would not deliver Germany from ruin. There would be no miracle weapons, no sudden reversal, no Eastern cataclysm to swallow defeat. But knowing defeat is not the same as accepting it. In towns like Zwolle, what remained of Germany's fighting force was no longer ideological. It was biological, men fighting to survive another dawn. Units were fractured, command was incoherent, ammunition was scarce, morale was threadbare. Yet, brutality remained intact. In the Netherlands, the Wehrmacht and SS had become an occupying power with nothing left to lose. Food had been seized, transportation blocked, civilian hunger weaponized, collective punishment had become policy. Retreating German columns burned villages behind them, not out of strategy, but spite. Civilians were no longer collateral. They were warnings. German garrisons occupying towns were under strict orders: resist at all costs. Because surrender meant Allied captivity, and capture meant stains on history no one wanted to wear. So defense doctrine became primal, hold until destroyed. Withdraw only if annihilation was certain, and even then, destroy everything as you leave. Zwolle was not Kleve, it was not Dresden, it was not Berlin, but it was close enough to matter. German engineers had wired buildings with explosives, church steeples hid snipers, anti-tank obstacles choked key streets. Machine gun emplacements pointed down alleys narrow enough to flood with bullets. The garrison was not enormous, but it was lethal. Estimates would later suggest several hundred German troops moved within and around the city that night. More than enough to kill one man, and more than enough to make a Canadian assault unthinkable without heavy loss. German soldiers did not sleep easily in those final months. Allied bombing had erased any sense of safety. Resistance movements had made trust impossible. Even silence had become suspicious. In towns like Zwolle, shadows were not empty. They were watching. So, when darkness carried something unfamiliar into the streets that night, when sudden gunfire echoed where nothing had moved, when grenades erupted across intersections for no clear reason, the garrison did not interpret it as chaos. They interpreted it as the beginning of something larger, not a scout, not sabotage, an advance, an infiltration, a prelude, because that is what armies do. They send one man ahead, before the flood comes, and the German command in Zwolle could feel it. Something was wrong with the night. The city waited. Leo Major kept moving, and the stage was set for a confrontation that would not resemble war as anyone had learned it. It would not arrive as wave or formation. It would not wear numbers. It would wear silence, and walk straight into the heart of the enemy. War is not always decided by numbers. Sometimes it is decided by perception. Trained scouts understand this better than anyone. The brain interprets danger faster than the eye can confirm it. Shadows multiply fear. Directionless sound becomes overwhelming. A single unexplained attack suggests a larger force waiting just beyond view. Leo Major understood cities. Built environments channel sound. Brick amplifies gunfire. Corridors echo footsteps. Darkness hides scale. Urban warfare is as much theater as it is violence. A well-trained enemy does not fear direct engagement. They fear uncertainty. Major did not walk into Zwolle with a plan in the traditional sense. He carried a single principle instead: make them believe they are surrounded. His method did not involve clearing blocks or hunting nests. It involved manufacturing chaos, fire at irregular intervals, move constantly, change weapon signatures, strike across distant points in rapid sequence. He did not aim for bodies. He aimed for confusion. The tactic was ancient. Raiders in history had always used drums at night to masquerade as armies. Fire arrows, false banners, noise. Leo Major became all of that in motion. He fired single shots, then vanished. He detonated explosives in alleys far apart. He allowed German patrols to glimpse his shape, just briefly, then withdrew before they could count him. One man appearing everywhere becomes impossible to track. To a frightened garrison unfamiliar with the scale of attacking forces outside the city, this felt like the first wave of a flood. Bad intelligence is oxygen to panic. There were no radios linking every street, no drones in the sky, no satellite eyes. The Germans in Zwolle received fragments of reality, and their imagination filled the rest. A machine gun opening fire near the rail station, a grenade explosion by the market square, rifle shots along the eastern quarter, voices that sounded like orders traveling through corridors. They did not see Leo Major. They saw his ghost, and ghosts multiply. By keeping combat small but scattered, he convinced officers they were being flanked, that the Canadians had already infiltrated deep, that resistance now would only increase casualties before inevitable surrender. The illusion did the work of a battalion, not because it was large, because it was invisible. German commanders could not plot what they could not see. They could not report what they couldn't identify. And so, they did what commanders do when their battlefield dissolves into rumor and shadow. They retreated. Leo Major did not carry a technological marvel into Zwolle. He carried rugged simplicity. His primary weapon was a Lee Enfield 303 rifle, bolt action, accurate, reliable, deadly in trained hands. It had been the backbone of British and Commonwealth forces since the First World War. For close work, he carried a Bren light machine gun, portable, steady. feared for its sharp report and sustained fire. He carried grenades, the language of chaos in steel form, and when needed, he carried German weapons too, captured submachine guns, loose ammunition taken from abandoned posts. He wasn't loyal to steel, only effect. Switching weapons does something important in urban combat. It alters the music of warfare. German soldiers were trained to recognize Allied weapon signatures, the Bren's sustained bark, the Enfield's sharp crack, the thud of British grenades. When enemy guns begin barking back in your dialect, doubt blooms. Is our position compromised? Have they seized our depot? Are they already inside command quarters? Weapon confusion cripples cohesion, and Leo Major invited it. He fired from different positions using different arms. He let German soldiers hear Allied cadence shift into German rhythm and back again. At moments, it felt as if the city itself had turned hostile. Technology does not need to be advanced to be devastating. It only needs to be unpredictable. And among the bricks and waterways of Zwolle, unpredictability became the most terrifying weapon of all. Canadian leadership never ordered Leo Major to liberate Zwolle alone. They did not even authorize what he did that night. They expected reconnaissance, a report, an estimate, and maybe, if fate smiled, a safe return. Leadership in war is designed to minimize risk, to control motion, to allocate resources. But Leo Major did not live inside rules. He lived inside outcome. The Canadian officers who sent him into Zwolle had already exhausted every effort to shape him into compliance. They failed. Eventually, they reclassified him, not by rank, but by reality. They stopped trying to assign him roles. They simply pointed and hoped. This is the shadow truth of wartime leadership. Not every act of command is confident. Some are admissions. Admissions that this man cannot be managed. Admissions that sometimes chaos is preferable to paralysis. Admissions that one unpredictable soldier might succeed where structure fails. So, they sent him, not with conviction, with resignation. And that resignation opened the door to something no doctrine anticipated. No general would design a plan like this. No staff officer would permit it on paper. But war is not paper, and that night, the paper caught fire. As Leo Major entered the city, something rare was happening outside its walls. An army was waiting for news from a man they did not control. And inside Zwolle, German officers were trying to fight a war against something they could not classify. Not a front, not a formation, but a presence. And somewhere between these two forces, one bound by charts and orders, one imprisoned by shadows and fear, walked a single figure with one eye and a city ahead of him. Preparing to do something war textbooks could never teach. The moment Leo Major crossed into Zwolle, the war changed shape, not by sound, not by fire, but by intent. Behind him, Canadian guns were silent. There would be no preliminary bombardment, no creeping barrage, no thunderous promise of reinforcements. If the city woke, it would not be from artillery. It would wake from one man. He slipped between buildings, hugging walls still scarred from earlier fighting. Doors were shut tight. Windows were blacked out with blankets. Streets lay empty except for drifting scraps of paper and shattered brick. German patrols moved through intersections in pairs. They talked quietly. Rifles hung low, but ready. Leo Major watched from the dark. This was not his first city. He had learned how shadows curved itself around doorways, how light from street lamps fractured through broken glass, how boots sounded heavy even when men tried to walk silently. He waited, then fired. Not a spray. One shot. A German soldier dropped near the outskirts of the city, and the noise cracked the air like ice shattering. Then, Leo vanished. He did not run. He melted. The surviving soldier shouted in alarm. Boots pounded. Voices rose. A flare ignited overhead, bleaching stone and shadow into white outlines. Major was gone. 10 minutes later, another shot. This one near the railway, a different weapon. The bark of a machine gun this time. German troops rushed toward the sound, and then grenades detonated on the other side of the city. Sharp cracks rolling like thunder through alleyways. This did not feel like sabotage. It felt like infiltration. It felt planned. Major moved constantly. He did not linger. Every position he fired from was abandoned instantly. The city became a maze of echoes. The Germans did what every trained unit does when attacked. They attempted to isolate, but there was nothing to isolate. There was no nucleus, no central pressure point. Only violence appearing in fragments across the map. German radios screamed into darkness, confused coordinates. No commander could grasp the scope. By midnight, officers had to decide something terrifying. They could not determine how many Canadian soldiers were inside Zwolle. One estimated a company, another guessed a battalion, a third said maybe two. The more shots they heard, the less they believed it was only a few men. Then something happened that fractured the German response completely. Leo Major stumbled across a parked German officer's car near the town center. Inside it, maps, orders, command documents. He did not steal them, he burned them, right there, in the street. And as the papers blackened and curled, he did something else. He made noise, deliberate, brazen. He fired shots into the air near the headquarters sector. Not to kill, to announce. German officers rushed out expecting a direct fight. Instead, they saw fire, smoke, flaming documents, and silence. Major had already withdrawn, but his message was unmistakable. Your house is breached, your command is known, and you are being watched. Panic is born not from death, but from the certainty that death knows where you live. German units began abandoning forward positions to reinforce what they believed was a failing corps. But there was no corps, so they chased smoke, literally. Then, Leo took a prisoner, a German officer separated from his patrol. Major grabbed him, hustled him down a side street into cover, disarmed him. The officer expected interrogation. Instead, Major told him the truth, or the truth as he chose to present it, that the Canadian Army was preparing to annihilate the city. That tanks were positioned outside, that artillery was ready, that the Germans could still leave, if they did it now. The officer, shaken by the night's chaos, believed him, and Leo let him go, just like that. No escort, no paperwork, one terrified man running back into a command structure already disintegrating. News travels fastest when fear carries it. The officer told others what he had heard. Word spread like smoke through barracks and stations, that a Canadian assault was minutes away, that their positions were already compromised, and that someone was walking freely inside headquarters zones. Around this time, German soldiers in outlying posts began retreating toward the east, not on order, on instinct. And as they withdrew, Leo Major followed, firing occasionally, always just enough to be heard. He did not chase. He shepherded. By early morning, something extraordinary had happened. The Germans were not fighting him anymore. They were avoiding him, moving away from the sound, leaving positions unmanned, abandoning weapons. He walked through deserted streets where hours earlier machine guns waited, craters smoked, ammunition boxes were left open, maps left half-folded, and then, walking past the central square, he saw something even stranger. German trucks, fuel running, drivers absent. They had fled in confusion. He climbed into one, drove it, fired as he went, circled the city deliberately to create the sound of movement. Engines, gunfire, braking, more noise, more illusion. He parked it and vanished again. By dawn, the city was a hollow shell. The German command believed it was under full Allied assault. They believed the city was lost. By sunrise on April 14th, they left. Zwolle stood empty. No surrender ceremony, no white flags, just silence, and a city that did not know it had already been freed. When Canadian units cautiously entered hours later, they expected resistance. Instead, they found doors opening, civilians emerging, and not a German soldier in sight. No defensive line, no last stand, no battle, just stunned people asking the same question over and over. Where are the Germans? And no one could answer, except one man. Before Zwolle fell without a battle, Leo Major had already made warbend once before. Months earlier, during the grinding nightmare of the Scheldt campaign, Leo Major had walked into another impossible moment. This one not in darkness and deception, but in open killing ground. It happened near the Scheldt estuary, where Canadian forces were attempting to force German troops from shoreline defenses that protected the final supply arteries into the Netherlands. This time, the enemy did not retreat, they advanced. German forces, battle-hardened remnants of SS and Wehrmacht formations, had entrenched themselves along a line of ruined buildings and muddy terrain where no armor could move. What should have been an Allied position became a killing field under concentrated fire. A Canadian unit, advancing under orders, walked directly into it. Almost immediately they were pinned down. Machine guns flayed the air, mortars pounded earth into vapor, bullets shredded men into the soil. And the Canadians could not move forward. They could not retreat. Calls for artillery went unanswered. Signals failed. Command confusion swallowed precious minutes. The unit was being eaten alive. Then, without instruction, without reinforcement, and without any form of official sanction, Leo Major left the trench. He took his Bren machine gun, and he walked straight into the fire, not sprinting, walking. German bullets tore the air around him. Earth jumped with impact. The muzzle flash from German positions burned like stars in a black sky. Major reached a fold in the ground, dropped, and opened fire. His Bren roared. German soldiers fell. He moved, fired again, moved, again. He was not trying to win the battle. He was buying time. Every burst he fired drew eyes. Every German who turned toward him stopped firing at the Canadians. He became a magnet for death. The more he fired, the more the Germans believed they were under a flanking assault. They began shifting men to respond, to plug holes that did not exist, to answer attacks that came from only one man. And then, something happened that should have ended it. A bullet struck Leo Major in the leg. He collapsed, blood-soaked earth. The pain was catastrophic. Muscle tore, bone cracked. For most men, this would have been the end. For Leo Major, it was inconvenient. He crawled, dragged himself to a better position, set his Bren on dirt, kept firing. Another shot, then another. His hands were slick with blood. His vision tunneled, but the machine gun did not stop. German forces, unable to see that the inferno was coming from one bleeding man, began withdrawing. They assumed a major attack was imminent. Their commanders ordered a tactical pullback. What they believed was a battalion assault, was a wounded corporal on his knees. By the time Canadian forces realized what had happened, the line had returned to Allied hands. The Germans were gone. The Canadian unit was alive, and Leo Major lay bleeding in the dirt. When officers reached him, they expected to find a dead man. Instead, they found one who attempted to stand. They ordered evacuation. He refused until his unit was secure. Then, and only then, he allowed medics to carry him from the field. The Germans never knew who had done it. They logged the encounter as a combat with Canadian commandos, as a multi-unit engagement, as a concentrated offensive by assault elements. They never recorded his name. They never grasped the scale. They simply retreated. For his actions that day, Leo Major was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal, one of the highest honors for non-commissioned bravery in the British Commonwealth. He refused to accept it, not because he opposed medals, but because the one offering it had insulted the Canadian Army earlier in the war. Politics, even at the edge of death, disgusted him. Later, another officer forced the award into his record. He could not tear paper, but he could tear armies. Zwolle was not the first time Leo Major made war believe in invisible enemies. It was only the most theatrical. At the Scheldt, he stood in daylight, bleeding, and pulled an entire German force backward, with nothing but a machine gun in his hands. Zwolle came later, when he learned that sometimes you do not need bullets, you only need belief. And in April 1945, as one last European city stood trembling under boot, Leo Major gave Zwolle the same thing he had given the Scheldt, a miracle, not divine, not poetic, a miracle of flesh refusing to yield. When dawn broke after the night he entered the city, Leo Major stood alone in a square that no longer belonged to Germany, and this time there was no blood, just silence. A city wakes without knowing who saved it. Morning came slowly. Light crept into Zwolle cautiously, like a visitor unsure the danger had truly ended. Curtains cracked open, doors unlatched inch by inch. Faces appeared behind glass, and then the streets filled. Civilians walked out into roadways they had avoided for years. No barking orders, no boots, no trucks, no German flags, only rubble and quiet. People expected rumors or orders or gunfire. They received none. The town, held in breath for years, finally exhaled. By mid-morning, Canadian forces entered Zwolle expecting to encounter barricades, booby traps, and a stubborn garrison. Instead, they found an empty stronghold. The reaction from command was disbelief. Scouts confirmed it. Search teams swept sector by sector. German headquarters abandoned, machine gun nests unmanned, artillery positions untouched but deserted. Supplies dropped in place. No last stand, no formal surrender, nothing. The city had simply stopped being occupied. Officers realized something was missing. They had not fought for this place. They had been given it. Only later did a single name rise from the rubble. A one-eyed scout. A man no one should have trusted. The Canadians pieced together confirmation from abandoned German messages and scattered reports. It had been Leo Major. Alone. When word reached the Dutch residents, it moved without technology. Not by radio, not by print, by voice, by whisper, by wonder. One soldier did this. Parents stood in doorways holding children. Old men took off hats. Families who had buried their dead wept in public. Flowers appeared at street corners. Notes were passed into pockets. This one man had robbed the Nazis of one more night. Zwolle would not burn. It would not starve. It had been spared not by division strength, but by defiance. Leo Major did not stay. He never attended ceremonies. He did not seek the mayor, did not speak in Churchillian sentences. He left as he had arrived. Quietly. The army tried to recognize him. He walked away. War had taken enough from him. It would not take his silence. The Distinguished Conduct Medal was eventually awarded for his actions. Formal recognition came. Photographs were taken. Reports were written. Histories recorded, but something inside Leo Major remained untouched. Because war did not heal, it only moved on, and Leo Major moved with it, towards something else. Another battlefield, another impossible demand, another refusal to die. The war ended the way it always does, not with peace, with paperwork. Germany collapsed in May 1945. Flags changed, uniforms vanished from streets. Churches rang in cities reduced to scaffolds. Victory parades rolled over cobblestones that had been black with blood a month earlier. Leo Major did not attend any. He did not return to Quebec as a conquering son. There were no interviews waiting, no standing ovations, no podiums with his name on them. He simply walked away from war like a man who had stepped out of a fire and did not intend to describe the heat. But war followed him anyway. After demobilization, Leo Major attempted to live like a civilian. Marriage, work, routine. All the soft edges life offers when it is no longer trying to kill you. It did not fit. His sleep was shallow. His temper was sharp. Peace did not land on him. It hovered. His Distinguished Conduct Medal sat in drawers. Sometimes it disappeared. Sometimes it reappeared. He did not talk about it. He did not talk about Zwolle. He did not talk about the Scheldt. To most people around him, he was simply a man who returned from history with something missing that did not show. But then, in 1950, war returned. This time, in a country he could barely pronounce, Korea. Canada joined the United Nations coalition response to the North Korean invasion. Once again, young men boarded ships. Once again, uniforms came out of closets. And once again, so did Leo Major, older, heavier, still one-eyed, still unfit, still unstoppable. No one asked him to go. He just went. He re-enlisted voluntarily and went straight back into war with the Royal 22e Regiment, the same French-Canadian regiment he had nearly been expelled from a decade earlier. Korea was nothing like Europe. Mountains replaced hedgerows. Snow replaced mud. Cold replaced shellfire as the greatest killer. At night, temperatures fell low enough to freeze breath in the air in pale clouds of death. Chinese forces moved at night, in silence. Waves of thousands rushing downhill into fire. The war no longer resembled strategy. It resembled survival. And once again, Leo Major was placed where survival was least likely. In November 1951, during the Battle of Hill 355, a towering elevation west of the Imjin River, Chinese forces shattered Canadian defensive positions through overwhelming assault. The hill fell, communications died, units scattered, commanders assumed it was lost. Then, without waiting for permission, Leo Major did something terrifyingly familiar. He gathered a handful of men, 18 soldiers, against an estimated 2 battalions, hundreds. They attacked uphill in the dark. There was no plan, no artillery support, no hope. They surprised the Chinese forces in close combat. Grenades exploded in steel rain, rifles flashed, shouts echoed. Leo Major moved through it as if memory itself guided him. Bullet wounds reopened old scars, fragments scraped flesh. But the hill burned under his advance, and before dawn, Hill 3055 was back in Canadian hands. For leading an impossible counterattack, for retaking ground against extraordinary odds, Leo Major was awarded his second Distinguished Conduct Medal, one of only a handful of Canadian soldiers in history to receive it twice, a rare honor, almost never given and never begged for. When reporters later asked him why he returned to war when he could have lived quietly, he answered simply, "I never learned how to live any other way." Leo Major left the army for good after Korea, returned to Canada, worked, aged, faded. The war fell behind him still echoing. But in Zwolle, he never faded. The city remembered. Children grew into adults knowing his name. Schools whispered the story. Elderly citizens spoke it softly at cafes by canals, not because they loved war, but because one man had loved their city just enough to walk into hell for it. In 2005, the city of Zwolle made Leo Major an honorary citizen, something the Canadian state never formally did. They unveiled plaques, streets remembered him, people wept, and when he died in October 2008, aged 87, flags lowered in the Netherlands, not in Canada. The man who freed a city was buried quietly, but not alone. He had never been alone again, because somewhere in Europe, a place still whispered his name when the night grew quiet. History likes its heroes simple. Clean lines, clear motives, perfect endings. But Leo Major did not belong to simplicity. He belonged to contradiction. A man deemed unfit who would not leave. A soldier with one eye who saw farther than most. A misfit who carried discipline the army could not teach. A reject who walked into cities no one else would enter. Wars are remembered by maps and monuments, but they are really decided in moments too small to properly record, in wet boots in dark streets, in frozen hands on rifle stocks, in minds that refuse to surrender even when bodies beg. Leo Major never claimed heroism. He never wrote memoirs. He never turned suffering into speech. He simply endured, again and again. While entire armies collided across continents, one man learned how to bend war by refusing to play by its expectations. When the world demanded conformity, he answered with defiance. When commanders wanted order, he delivered chaos. And when fear ruled cities, he walked into them alone. Zwolle does not celebrate a battle. It celebrates absence, the sound that did not come, the destruction that was not allowed, the children who slept when they should not have. There are no statues of Leo Major holding a rifle in town squares. There are no bronze horses or marble wings. There are streets, cafes, families alive because one man decided town lights should not go out forever. War often gives us reasons to despair in human nature. Leo Major stands as its correction, not because he was gentle, not because he was kind, but because when the world unfolded into cruelty, he answered it with something more stubborn, courage, not theatrical, not perfect, enduring. And perhaps the truth of war is this: it does not remember us for who we meant to be, only for who we became when the night was deepest, when the city was quiet, and when one figure stepped forward, so history would not have to.